Uncertain futures.
And Joan.
Hello, Joan. How's things?
Things with you?
Things are pretty good. Currently trying to navigate to the old link that we should send people. But otherwise, it's been a decent week. We've had some pretty wonderful weather. I have found a little spot by the daughter where I can climb on rocks, which is bringing me a lot of pleasure.
Lovely.
Have you got any secret getaways under these circumstances?
Yes, well, my friend has luckily been identifying little kind of ditches and hedge bushes that can be hidden in, that are a little bit outside of the city, away from all the throngs in the green spaces and parks. So just been hiding in bushes and chilling out.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a sweet sort of pool of information to sort of gather, which is just where can you go that won't be full of people, and it's generally a good thing to be aware of, I think. But under these circumstances, it makes it certainly more relaxing, I think, to enjoy the outdoors. So today we have returned for another episode of Uncertain Futures. As our regular listeners will know, this is a future where we examine how. It's a future. It's a podcast, I suppose, where we examine possible futures, and we kind of consider how the human intuitions of constancy might be invalidated as they sort of have been recently. So every week, myself and my co-host Joan Summers Donnelly will present to each other an idea or a theme of sorts, which describes a possible future, or maybe an exploration of how people in the past considered what the future might be like. So with that in mind, I'm due to go first for presenting an episode, and I look forward to describing or outlining to you, Joan, a concept that was actually suggested by one of our listeners, one of our loyal listeners, Robbie O'Brien.
But Patrick, every week you say my full name, but then you never say your full name.
Patrick George Paul King, since I want to get as many syllables in there as you have.
That's quite a few. That's half the Beatles.
Yeah, no, it's actually, it is. If I'd been called John, then I would have been all the Beatles that sort of, wrote. I mean, Ringo was great and all, but anyway, we're not here to shit talk. Yeah. So yes, Robbie made a suggestion about a podcast, and essentially the theme is points of no return. Now, I gotta say, before he had even given an example, I was already feeling a little skeptical, because something inside of me felt that this was too categorical. But nonetheless, I was seduced by the examples provided, and I spent the rest of the week periodically imagining what other points of no return there might be. And I definitely want you to be thinking, what is a point of no return? And the example that was given was surrounded radiation, essentially. It surrounded the fact that around, from 1945 to 1955 or whatever, there was not only the development of nuclear capabilities, but there was also the testing of many bombs and the use of two bombs. But especially with the testing, this resulted in an increase in certain kinds of radioactive material, which filtered into systems even at very, very low levels, even at levels that would be considered almost harmless. It still becomes sort of a background that imbues the modern day or the modern landscape. It's a distinct marker of having passed that point. Now, we'll get back to this question of, is it really a point of no return? Because this is a background that decays over time, and the pulse in radiation, which we can actually see in all life forms in the sort of carbon dating. You can see a pulse in the amount of mildly radioactive or product of radioactive processes, carbon-14. But sometimes it's not just this abstract observable thing. In the case of this radiation spike, it actually results in all steel production having been contaminated after this point. And so to this day, there is a market for low background steel. So basically, if you want to make some medical equipment that relies on, sensing radioactive processes, or a lot of the time this will be dyes and that kind of thing, or if you want to make a Geiger counter, or there are a few other applications where the amount of radiation that will just be present or that will be emitted from some steel that's been produced since that occasion, because in the smelting process they're using a variety of different components. Some of them will have been contaminated, and so anything that comes after that period is going to perform less well for those metrics. So that's kind of one concise example of a kind of bridge that was crossed. So yeah. The idea of finding something that's pure then was sort of what fixated me, was trying to find an example of something that really, really served as a good point of no return. And I'll just stop and ask you, is there anything that comes to mind for you off the top of your head as decisive?
Well, I mean, it is an interesting concept, but I think I'd like to, I don't know, expand a bit, or if you want to expand a bit on what that even would mean, like the point of no return, because I mean, it's hard to really say, it's like return to what? We can't, of course we can't go back to how things even, you know what I mean? We can't time travel, so things are necessarily going to be different and, past the point of return, everything. I don't know. I'm just finding it hard to kind of. I know what you mean in terms of, say, radioactivity or things that we've, maybe unleashed or opened up or extracted that, have brought changes in the world that cannot be undone. But yeah, I just think as a concept, if you want it, when you're asking me for an example, I'm a bit kind of struggling to think exactly of one that's not just in this kind of just the typical say oil or climate, just to say climate change, like CO2 or that's in this sort of this public consciousness at the moment of we're at a tipping point. I'm so trying to think more. I'd like to think more broadly about this idea of point of no return. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
That's definitely the kind of thing that was irking me as I was trying to come up with examples. And where I've sort of settled is that there isn't a point of no return. Isn't a point. It's kind of a spectrum of
course, like everything.
Of course. Oh yeah. Definitely going to be right when you say that. But so there's a number of factors that I think are very key. One is how significant of a change is this something describing? By whatever metrics you choose to assign, and then another is how possible is it that we can, or that this could be reversed, and then the other one is sort of how probable. So a lot of things, and this will be interesting in sort of a different category, which I was inevitably drawn to, which was kind of human affairs and even basic ideas that themselves on some level represent such a big shift that it's hard to imagine people ever going back from that shift, just because the idea itself is sort of self-sustaining. The question of finding some definable moment as a big point of no return sort of preoccupied me a little bit, and then I thought of an example which is historic, and it's also something that I think people don't talk about enough, especially in these days of kind of big picture gloominess of the future, climate change, pandemics, etc. There's all these big bad guys, and also there's some historical extinction events that get a lot of attention. Like everyone knows about the dinosaurs getting smashed up by that asteroid. But what people are often not as aware of, and I'm curious if you've ever heard of it, is the Great Oxygenation Event.
Go on.
Well, the Great Oxygenation Event it describes the process by which our planet got, pumped full of oxygen. So the event, I mean, the dating of it is actually kind of tricky because there's some debate about how long of a period it was. but it's over 2 billion years ago, right? Our planet underwent this massive shift, whereby before the not only was there no oxygen in the atmosphere. Oxygen isn't just this like particular useful piece of chemistry to us. It's also fundamental to the chemistry of the whole planet. So we now have an oxidizing atmosphere, whereas prior to the great oxygenation event, we had a reducing atmosphere. And without going into the chemistry of what differentiates these two processes, it would have made things just radically different on the ground. There would have been colors and shiny metals that would never rust because there was no donation of electrons going on. So just the makeup of the world was fundamentally different. And then some clever bacteria worked out how to produce oxygen in order to facilitate photosynthesis and therefore produce massive amounts of energy. And this was a terribly good strategy. It displaced sulfur-reducing bacteria that were around beforehand, which is another kind of big shift. The oceans presumably used to be quite purple because that's the colour that these bacteria are thought to have been.
Oh, that's cool.
I think that's cool. I just think the image of a purple ocean is pretty cool. But yeah, so eventually the Great Oxygenation Event was the flourishing of these new life forms that were producing oxygen using photosynthesis. And it was a catastrophe. It killed virtually everything and upset the climate so severely that the Earth was either once or a number of times more or less severely turned into a giant snowball.
Wait, was multiple times turned into a giant snowball?
Well, if it was multiple times, then it was probably less intensive as a snowball. Basically, there's like differing theories, as I understand it, between sort of whether it was one long period of just being a full ice sheet covering the whole Earth, or whether there were multiple periods which were perhaps not as extreme. But that certainly, the oxygenation event, to me, represents a pretty well fits the category or the criteria of a sort of point of no return, because the entire environment has been shifted. So that's kind of a fun historical example. Like you mentioned a few, like the future ones when you talk about resources and oil, for example. So running out of a resource seems like a very obvious example of this. And people talk a lot about running out of oil, and it's kind of this complicated conversation because there's always more oil in places that are harder to reach, so it's kind of a moving target. There are some of the resources which might not be so clear. Helium is a good one. I'm not sure if you're aware that those children carrying around those helium balloons are depriving us of one of our most important and entirely depletable resources.
Yes, I had heard something about that before,
Yeah, so helium is, obviously it escapes. It's one of the two elements that will just go
a great escape artist of our time.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a pretty cool element to have for lots of different purposes, including really rad ideas for space blimps over Venus, because Venus is impossible to actually set foot on. So most of the people that are getting upset about the fact that we might have no helium in the future are building rockets, and they're thinking about sci-fi-ish ideas of how to use the helium.
Boo-hoo.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly an uncertain future for the general public, like a world without helium. I mean, like, imagine that your parties didn't have balloons.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Elon Musk. But like the thing about, we kind of touched on this before about sources, like when we talked about bananas, and the fact that like that people are always saying like, oh my god, or like this thing is going to be extinct, or depleted, or we'll run out of at the end of oil or whatever. But like we were saying about bananas, like people, we always find something else to move on to. So partly, I mean, of course, people have to like work on that, like, and research what that could be, and hopefully make it something that's maybe less environmentally damaging than the thing came before, rather than more. But that's not my job, so I don't have to worry about it. So, but sometimes it just seems very like, well, okay, the oil thing is something. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't. If we're not really going to talk about oil, maybe we shouldn't like. I think talk about it vaguely, but
it just falls into the category of resource depletion, which is, I think, a more boring but quite easily defined point of no return kind of concept. And fissile material is another one as well as oil, where there's vast but still limited stocks there. And
Yeah.
you know,
I think it's interesting the what you said actually about the uh, point of no return, say being related to maybe ideas or knowledge or something.
yeah.
Like
So
rather than
that's
thinking of resources, the idea of like, okay, what do we know or what did we at some point discover or find out about ourselves or the world or something that then, that sort of, yeah, maybe not changed everything, but like that you can't go back to not knowing it or even if,
yeah. No, you're definitely getting
that's an interesting
to.
question.
I think what I was the human affairs element, which is definitely full of these points of no return, but also as soon as you start considering them, they get even harder to define. So the easiest one to define, I think, which again really fits the category quite well and harkens back to the first example given, was when we developed nuclear bombs. It's I know that there is an objective to denuclearize globally, and I wouldn't be a complete pessimist about the possibility of doing that to some degree very successfully. But even if we did, I mean, the world after nuclear bombs is simply not the same as the world before, and that is a pretty definable series of steps whereby that information became available, then it became developed, and then it became implemented. So that kind of points to a very broad category, I think, for points of no return, which is technological developments. I mean, they don't need to be harmful. I mean, it could be the vaccine. It could be like even an awareness of how infection works. Something as kind of abstract and commonplace as that can have a huge impact. And although, of course, we could return to it by just ignoring that it's real, it's just not. It's not a fact that happens. But that kind of concern, I think, when thinking of these things as points of no return, which when we're talking about humans, I think we get confused by human agency. Nothing is impossible if people simply decide to do otherwise. I think is how, at least I can find myself intuitively thinking. So I was drawn to taking examples from nature, as opposed to just looking at human society. Though I think there's lots to discuss there, and I actually just jumped right back to when the Great Oxygenation Event happened. There was what is now sort of a very popular, well described process in our evolutionary history, where the first eukaryotes came to exist, and they are now described oftentimes as organisms that essentially took some of these photosynthetic bacteria you mentioned earlier, and they probably ate them or something, but through a chaotic process where there are a lot of them eating a lot of them, some of them, or one of them, developed a sort of symbiotic relationship with the photosynthetic thing, and then some genes were swapped around such that the purpose of this now ingested bacteria was to churn out energy if given sugars and oxygen, and they are now the mitochondria, and we have lots of them in most of our cells. So that to me represents a pretty significant point of no return, and I sort of thought of it in order to liken it to how people talk about the future of humanity. Now this is kind of maybe a bit of a leap, but talking about human extinction almost wouldn't work as an uncertain future episode, because to many people it seems sort of inevitable. Like they sort of think that humans are going to get wiped out. Either we're going to kill ourselves with climate change, or we're going to blow ourselves up, or we'll get wiped out by a bigger pandemic. Nature will go on. I'm not saying it's what everyone believes, but it's a relatively commonly expressed perspective. And I think it's...
What's... Sorry if I'm interrupting at a bad point, but like, what's the alternative? That we live forever, humans?
Well, what's the alternative is a good point, right? I mean, it's certainly ridiculous to imagine there will be stasis biologically, and this sort of form that we have is likely to be preserved. But I think it might make more sense, to talk about humans as going extinct. It sort of depends on how it's phrased. It could be like talking about eukaryotes just as they came up and being like, well, they're everything dies here, so why would you expect those things to survive? Now, obviously, the exact forms that exist back then didn't survive, but they had innovations and capabilities that made them thrive and form an enormous bough on the tree of life. And I sort of sometimes think when imagining futures, we tend to be very pessimistic about the future of the human race, and we tend to undersell the fact that we ourselves are sort of a point of no return. We ourselves, just like the eukaryotes, consist of a host of innovations that are so obviously successful that it's kind of naive to imagine that we won't be, or we aren't likely to be, the seed of a rather persistent change of affairs.
I don't know, Patrick. You're saying with all this talk about this great oxygenation and like big, huge change, which also was like the planet, which also was very, very destructive for other creatures, and also about this how you're talking about humans now. I'm just getting a bit worried that now our podcast is coming across as being very like pro climate change, like a positive spin on climate change or something, and that we are like. That we're the I mean, I know this is not how it's not I think really how you're intending it, but it's interesting how we're kind of putting quite a like in our I suppose our some of our narratives, the things we've discussed are quite like contrary in terms of like the outlook compared to like a lot of people's discussions at the moment about this climate emergency we're in. Which I suppose, we could be different, but But what do you mean about the because just I was thinking about the great oxygenation thing being like, oh well, so if we're comparing it to like what's going on now with the planet, it's sort of like, well, the climate's always changing, and some
this is
winners and losers.
I am happy to entertain this tangent, and there's not that much really more to mention elsewhere. There are probably bleaker points, to be honest, than these ones, which may sound sort of, in tone, I don't know if optimistic is the right word. I find this is maybe a bit too abstract to be considered optimistic for a experience. But I can see that it's got some difference as you describe. I tend to, I think it's objectively obvious that the great extinction events of the past were more severe in terms of there was less biodiversity at the time to extinguish. That's been kind of consistently increasing. So in a way, the stakes for that are always growing, but they were upsets to the entire planet that were more severe than climate change. But that shouldn't really reassure anyone. I mean, if you talk about the entire Earth turning into a frozen wasteland as being, a 10 or something, and then climate change only comes out as a 3. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's all getting a bit like what was I going to say? I was just more. It was more just a passing comment on. I was thinking if people tune into this who don't know us and know sort of, I suppose, our politics and interests, it could like very well come across that we're just like, everybody's being so negative these days. Humans are the seed of the future. We're going to have a much hotter, sexier planet, and it's all going to be good.
No, I don't expect.
So,
I personally,
I don't mean to.
Yeah, I'm not well adapted to heat, but obviously.
No, we're Irish, so and also Matthew comments that uncertain futures has always been pro-populist. So yeah, that's where we stand. Well, no, it's just I suppose we did, but I mean, I don't mean it's a bad thing that we're having this different kinds of narratives because like, and we're more speculating on things. So we're really, like we said at the beginning, we're not here to kind of like sort of what like this is what people should do in the future. This is how it is going to happen, or this is how it's more just the like playing around with different possibilities and speculating. So I think it's interesting to go into different sort of sides of arguments, because I wouldn't feel like confident to talk on a more authoritatively about climate science and where we're going realistically, or where we should be, what we should be doing, or anything. So but yeah, sorry, I want to go back to and let you go back to this thing about the like humans. Can you say more about that? The sound of like humans being like some sort of seed or something? Because while I was a little bit like put off by it sounding very like, we have now, when God created Adam and Eve, it was a totally different sort of, I don't know, this is kind of exceptionalism again of like humans being like exceptional. But I think maybe you're saying more, of course, like we're going to evolve into other things, and that yeah, like we can't go backward. But
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, it's not. I am
yeah, what
definitely
are we going to
important. I
evolve
don't.
into?
I think it's very important to recognize with all of these that none of them are absolutely absolute. You can always imagine a way that you can go backwards.
Absolutely, absolute.
And
They're absolutely inabsolute. Is that the term?
I don't know. But it is definitely the case that humans could be wiped out by we could. I've been sort of resisting the urge to primarily focus on those kinds of uncertain futures because they're easy, but they're just sort of depressing and quick. Um, but it's sort of a probability game, right? When the eukaryotes first appeared, the point is that the innovation was so significant that there was some probability that it would persist and it would thrive, and I suppose what this really calls to mind, this topic perhaps to be better explored another day, is the idea that we sometimes jump between considering change in living systems, in organisms, in human societies especially, as either sort of a stable response to a given environment, right, which in some corners has been a sort of dominant perspective where people have sought to explain the behaviors of different people in different environments, or even like natural environments, not only social ones, and sort of say, oh well, there's a stable cultural response that emerges and remains constant as a function of that environment. And then there's another perspective, which is that these kinds of systems, whether they be human or non-human, are better described in a kind of evolutionary context. So, and this isn't to say that we're describing each behavior as a function of some biological evolution, but also that the behavior itself between humans is itself evolutionary. That people are building on concepts and changing, and it's not that there's any well understood or clear direction to the change, but that human behavior itself, you can imagine a specific example like developing the bomb, or you can say more generally our capacity for language or something like that, is a self-reinforcing behavior that is stable and that there's a high probability that it'll persist. That's essentially, in the most boring terms, the description of what I was making out for humans, and that gives humans capabilities that we can all observe that would suggest to me that it's unlikely that humans will be wiped out. You wouldn't need that many humans to survive for them to still be terribly effective with particular resources.
But the thing about humans like dying out, like I don't necessarily see it in the way of like, oh, we're gonna do something. Some idiot is gonna press the big button, and then we'll all just be blown up in one go, and there will be, and it'll be in about 70 years or something. Like I'm more like thinking in the long game, that in the terms of the like life of the planet, we haven't been around for that long, but and at some point we probably won't be around anymore, but there'll be other things around. But I just mean that at some point, like it just, like I was kind of saying earlier, what's the alternative? Like that humans live forever, the humans reign as a species forever, and until the universe ends or something. But it just seems like, I don't mean that we wouldn't evolve into other things, but it just seems that, I don't know, like why would we stay around? I don't know. I just think it could be like in a million years, but would it not be that we'll be replaced by something else, or we'll evolve into something else, or we'll go into another planet and then we'll mutate, or like have to adapt, like genetically adapt to other, to Mars or whatever, that will be something else? But maybe that's what you're saying.
That is,
but
yeah, there's no
I feel like we won't be humans as I don't know. I don't think we'll be humans as I think we'll be a different species or something.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't. I don't think that there's going to be any constancy. But I think that I suppose the point that remains relevant from the eukaryotes is that we don't have the original eukaryote that was created, but what we have is this massive explosive legacy because of the efficacy that was there in that evolutionary process, and that the same could be true of humans. That while we won't have the original humans left, the emergence from humans will have very wide-reaching implications into the future. And I don't think this would necessarily just be humans, by the way. I think if humans, this is definitely not something to go into in too much detail, but if humans were to vanish, I would place personally a relatively high bet, if I could get my money back somehow, on some other intelligent species eventually rising to, you know, similar capabilities as humans on some
similar planet destroying capabilities.
Yeah, whether or not they chose to do that with their time, I don't know. But I definitely.
Yeah. Sure. It's like it's just exactly like you know, the 20s in Ireland. The British leave, the Catholic Church swoops in. I mean, I don't know what the Catholic Church to the British, which would be the humans in this scenario, would be, but yeah, something like that. It is an interesting question. I mean, how we not what you originally posed, but what would be if it was a species that's around today? Like, what would be the species that is going to swoop in there?
Yeah, I think that's a class topic for just like general sci-fi and stuff. I think it's really interesting. So I will just leave you.
Yeah, and you suggest. We have some listeners, watchers. So if anyone has any suggestions for that, yes. Because it's not something I've researched, but
I will just leave you with one fully dystopian, non-optimistic, very sci-fi thing in the future that could be a point of absolutely no return, and it is known as a false vacuum. The concept is that we are living at the moment in a false vacuum of space, which seems stable, but actually isn't stable. It's in a metastable state, which means that it would be possible for space and matter to become more stable, right? And I know that sounds fine.
Did you say that again?
So in theory, okay, so this is totally theoretical. The idea is that space and matter could be existing in a metastable state, whereby it looks like it's in its most stable position in sort of like a configuration is probably the best way to put it. But it could actually be, whether given enough energy or given enough time, it could become even more stable. And that this could produce a huge amount of energy, and then it could also cause everything around it to enter this this metastable, or sorry, to be destabilized and then re-enter a more stable state. And the fact that it's more stable basically speaks to the fact that it's a chain reaction. So once it starts, if it's possible, and no one knows if it is, then it would spread, and it would start spreading at close to the speed of light, and it would just spread through the universe until the entire universe was destroyed. Stephen Hawking, before his death, tweeted about the possibility that it would occur if we were to build a hadron collider the size of the Earth.
That would be difficult.
Yes. So
how would they get the planning permission?
Anyway, yeah, so there you go. There's a final, just like really, really clear example of a possible point of no return.
That would be hard to return from.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it would be interesting if anyone else has ideas of like this, or like or things that go to mind about this point of no return. Because I still find it hard to like think of things myself. I know we can like maybe move topic, but if anyone wants to comment, because even as you were discussing, we were talking a little bit earlier about the human stuff. I don't know. I just found myself getting a bit lost, to be honest. But like in the concept of it or something.
Yeah, the concept is slightly abstract and difficult to sort of.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard. It is kind of it is abstract. It's hard to, because there are a lot of things we think like, oh, but sure, we have this now, so we can't go back. You know, like even smartphones, as we were saying last time. I was saying last time, everyone's just like, I don't know, always waxing lyrical about these computers in our pockets and everything. But you know, if somehow everyone's phone got stolen, or like, you know, aliens came with a big magnet or something and like and just kind of you know, mugged us or something, like I don't know, if we weren't able to, we didn't have the ores, whatever, like the which also go back to the resources thing. You know, we'd probably be great. You know what I mean? It's not like we've really, you know, there's so many things that we're like, oh my god, we couldn't live like this now. We can live with it. But I wonder which things are really those things. You know, which things we really not go back to. Like, because I think if forced to, we'll be fine without smartphones. You know what I mean? Like, but it's just that we're like, it's a habit. You know. But
I think a good kind of.
I know, and that's just a bit of a facetious example, but like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no. I definitely think you're right that there's a lot of subjectivity as to deciding sort of what's a real game changer. If I wanted to sort of try and really examine that, I think I'd like to talk to someone who or do a lot of reading sort of on game theory. I feel like while game theorists are sometimes have been given control over decisions that are sort of out of their depth, the nuclear case being another very good example of that, and the Vietnam War, they nonetheless, I think, kind of do identify clear points in human communication whereby something emerges which causes a sort of predictable strategy shift, and that those kinds of strategy shifts I think would be good candidates.
Yeah, Robbie is commenting helium. Robbie, we talked about helium.
He's probably
before.
behind in the podcast. Anyway, John, I'm curious to hear your insight into the uncertainty of the future.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I'm gonna just get right down to it.
We're hearing some comments here. MRI machines. Sorry, was an example of the low radiation.
Yes, and no more lots of hospital equipment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for the more specific example there, because actually we talked about helium more. We didn't really, talk about specific examples there. We were just like, oh yeah, helium, that's a thing, isn't it? But I just didn't, because I interrupted you. Okay, and now I'm interrupting myself. Okay, so a mutual friend of ours, actually, Breed. I remember I stayed with her when I was coming back to Belgium after Christmas, and because I was going over land and getting like the Eurostar, and then we were chatting about that because she was saying like her New Year's resolution was to not fly at all in 2020. But little did she know she wouldn't be able to be very smug about that, or she would use the moral high ground on not flying in 2020, because there's a lot of people who are not going to be flying in 2020. So yeah, basically, and then one thing that's going on at the moment is that so obviously a lot of people can't. There's a lot of restrictions on travel right now. Okay, and including like. In Ireland, until recently, you could only go 2 kilometers outside, only travel within a 2 kilometer radius of your house, which is quite restrictive, in terms of traveling anywhere. And so a lot of galleries and museums, like here, but a lot like all over the world, are doing these kind of like online, virtual tours of galleries. So some of my friend here was telling me that they went like going to some Belgian like museums, going to see all the Dutch masters and everything. And it's great because a lot of the museums here, you actually have to pay quite a lot to go and see stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like music. It's like, oh great, I can go see this exhibition because normally I have to pay to go in there. I was thinking like there's a lot of that stuff. Okay, it's useful for us while we're still in the lockdown or slowly coming out of it. That people have a lot of free evenings or days or weekends or whatever. Some people do not because they're working even more than usual, but a lot of people do. And so it's like things that they can do, right now in lockdown, going to a museum virtually. But it's also going to be quite useful for after the lockdown because it's very uncertain, and like when it's going to be we're going to be able to travel again, or like without too much stress, right? Or like too much restriction, or when people will be able to go on holidays.
Yeah.
So basically, what I wanted to talk about or think about with you is, will the future of tourism, like in the coming months, but possibly in the later future, be virtual, cyber tourism? Yeah, so it's not the most exciting topic compared to like humans, compared to like the Earth's like falling into a vacuum or whatever. But I'm here for the banal. Someone's got to think of the boring stuff as well.
So virtual tourism, yeah. No, I think it's
what?
I'm sorry, I'm musing over the subject, and I do think it's a big question because there's all the tools for it, and then there's the trends that go the other way, but the trends precede the tools.
Yeah. So I'll just say a few more things about it, and then we can kind of like chat about it, because it's not like, I think people it's not something I have to explain in depth, like, you know, what that would mean, but like, so I suppose what it could mean or look like is is like virtual reality. You kind of maybe in your own home, or maybe you would go to some kind of like center, or you would go and I don't know, stay in some place that's in your city, but like kind of like a holiday home type thing. But then you would have an experience through VR or other, yeah, maybe there's other things as well that would transport you, but just virtually, to a different place, a different location, and you could, do some sightseeing. You could take like a little holiday, but virtual. And so, like, tourism is kind of an information-heavy activity in terms of like the guidebooks and just information and like statistics, and it just, I mean, obviously it's experiential, but it is also, there's a lot of information around it. And like, you know, for example, you know, if people walk around a city with a guidebook and looking up and like, when was this church built and blah blah. But you know, if you had some kind of VR thing, you could get information just much more, more easily, or it could be kind of into your ear or like or whatever. So it could, like, on the one hand, it's probably easy to transform it into a cyber activity, but it is also like social and relational. So yeah, there's parts obviously that would be hard to replicate, such as like interacting with locals, or crucially for me, food, eating like in that country. And so there's like technologies like GIS, like creating realistic images and like simulations of different experiences. You could like visit like churches and museums, and it seems like it'll be quite good for like sightseeing. You know, like a lot of tourism does seem to be about going there and seeing, you know, that cathedral and that painting, and you know, being outside that place where this famous singer was born, or poet, or whatever. So like this kind of ticking the list tourism, it seems like, you know, maybe people could just do it on, like, do it a picture VR. But you know, then there's the whole question, which maybe we can discuss in a minute if you want to have any thoughts about it, of this whole obsession with like authentically, you know, really seeing the real thing, like being in front of the Mona Lisa for reals. But then if
I don't know, last time I saw the Mona Lisa, like it felt pretty lame.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's the thing. It's kind of overrated. And so there's an interesting thing about this as well. It's like, so one of the Mona Lisa thing. Well, like, one of the pros of this will be like, there'll be a lot of faffing around, you know? You could just like instantly get there. You wouldn't have to figure out like, oh, what bus do we get? Well, like, do we have to get a taxi? Oh no, sitting for hours in transport. Like, there's just a lot less faffing, and you could just get right to it. But sorry now, I'm kind of losing my what did I want to say now? And so but there are, so there's places that you might be better to visit in person, but there are places. I did find an article, bizarrely, with like the best countries to visit virtually. Do I have any guesses of what is this article says might be the best places to visit virtually?
I mean, I feel like France should be there because they've got so much money in their tourism industry. They probably do build virtual tours, do they not? No, it's not there.
Well, yeah, because that's the thing. Some of this does, like some of this, it's not just future. It's already exists. But no, funnily enough, they specifically mentioned France as a place that it wouldn't be good for, because France and Italy are like so famed for their cuisine. So yeah, but no, so the places they recommended were Norway, because one, apparently Norway is like the most tech savvy place in the world, according to this random article I found. So they actually do have a lot of stuff available already, and you know, see a magnificent fjord from above without having to like do a 7-hour hike, if that's not what you're into. Of course, most people will probably go there for the hiking, so you know, it's and so yeah, apparently Norway are just like, they're on it, and you've loads of the country that you can see like this way. And the USA, funnily enough, a point about the USA was that, well, because they also have a lot of this developed already, and like and then so there's a lot of tech that's already there. And then it mentioned bit of a dig that the US is the one country that very few people visit for the food.
That's wonderful.
as opposed to the France thing. And then the other one was just Australia. I think just similar reasons to Norway or something. Just like there's loads of like
It's a
remote
vast terrain
places.
as well.
Yeah, vast terrain and like they got lots of internet. I don't know, something like that. So
Yeah, I mean.
yeah, and so there's another. What just yeah. Sorry.
Well, no. Like, if you've got one more example, go for it. I'm just sort of as soon as I kind of understood, you gave the first examples. What came to mind was, have you ever? I mean, I know you don't play many video games, Joan. Have you ever played any, or do you know?
Never. I don't even know what they are. No.
Have
I ever played one?
You ever heard of Assassin's Creed?
Yes.
Right. So it's a game that's primarily famous for the mechanics, and we shan't go into them. The plot line surrounds sort of various dubious interpretations of history, which are all centered around the activities of a particular assassin's guild, which is implied to be time traveling. But that really doesn't matter. The games are set in historical locations, and the locations are reconstructed. And I remember playing one of them, which was set in Venice, and it was remarkable. And I remember I would Google just to check, like, is that building actually where they say it is? And it's exactly where it is, and it looks exactly the way it's supposed to look. And it was so good that when they released a game which I didn't play, which was set in ancient Egypt, Egyptologists, who are often not video gamers, they got sort of put onto this content, and they were really excited to be going around, but they kept getting confused because people kept attacking them and trying to kill them.
They were like, I'm just trying to have a nice holiday, and people keep, because that's what I was thinking, like, actually, yeah, there would maybe be a crossover, like, who would want to do this? Like, would there be kind of like gamers who already like enjoy this kind of worlds, being like, oh, I want to do this but play this game in different places, but then like it'd be funny if there was this weird overlap of people being like in this VR, like having a lovely like gondola ride in Venice, and then somebody just like jumps down and like just like stabs their husband or something.
Yeah, that's
like,
yeah. So they released a version of the game that didn't have any of the combat, just for the.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, because that's what I was thinking. Like one thing. Then I'll. One thing I was thinking is like, part of it does seem like as Dara's commenting, like he said, I can't imagine anything worse, and that like it does seem like awful and so shallow, but then there's I think there's things that we afford that you would be able to get out of this, and there's things that you couldn't. So I was thinking, like, I love just walking around cities, like getting lost in cities, often just like the residential and like outer suburban part, not necessarily like the historical part, and like. So I would love just to be able to plonk down in like some city and walk around it like a lot and just see what it's like without even having to like, just to see what different city streets. And then the weird thing is you'd be like some kind of weird ghost, you wouldn't be actually there. So like you couldn't, so that's one down thing. So then, yeah, just a few pros and cons I was thinking about. So like the pros, some obvious ones are kind of, would probably be cheaper, more environmentally friendly. Like Robbie mentions a few things that I had been thinking as well. That like, it would be expensive for people to invest in VR equipment. But I was thinking, maybe you'd go somewhere, or like in a hotel, you'd stay somewhere, like, or in your, there'd be centers where you could go to kind of have the experience.
Travel agencies would see a comeback.
What?
Travel agencies would see a comeback.
Yes, exactly. Because you buy kind of like a package deal from like a package holiday kind of, but maybe you just go maybe to like. So another thing he was saying is that like he doesn't know about it for holidays, but you could do it on an evening. So I think more of it like a day trip. You might kind of go with friends to this place, and you say, oh, we're going to spend the day like in this place. But maybe if you have like a package deal or something, you'd also like order food that was so you'd also get to eat food that was like the same cuisine. Because like a lot of places,
you are really
the cities in the world,
the food deficit.
Well, it's it's my priorities, but like, so a lot of cities in the world you can get cuisine from like different places in the world, and like often that's more fitting to your taste buds than when you go to the place and you're like, oh, I don't like Indian food in India, because how you're used to it is so different. So maybe it would just be like, it would be more suitable for people. So, and then more environmentally friendly because less flying, less faffing around. We already talked about that. Then less like Airbnbs and stuff. Like there's a lot of over tourism going on in like European cities, probably a lot of places, but like we're probably familiar with European cities, like Barcelona, even like Dublin as well, like Berlin, and like where it's ruining the rental market because of Airbnbs like popping up and all over the place. And so there's a lot of people who are very like angry about this kind of mass tourism and like cruise ships coming in places and like cruise ships are, I don't know what's going to happen with cruise ships the next year or two, but hopefully not much. but yeah, so maybe you could help like in that, on that side of like less, congestion, of like less over tourism. People weren't actually going there; they were just ghosting their way through like the streets. But then at the same time, like, is there going to be a loss of like income for people? Like, as tourism is a huge economic thing in a lot of countries, even in Ireland, especially smaller places in Ireland. Like, that's all they that's mostly what they live off. Like a lot in, like, say in the west of Ireland, like Clare and Galway and stuff. So yeah, so loss of income, yeah, no food, another con, and yeah, not less interaction with people, from the place. Like, you couldn't interact with people, which is what some people do. They want to travel, they want to get to know people, see what people are like, and what the culture is, and like have the crack, get drunk with people, that kind of stuff. So, like, yeah, one kind of question I had is, well, one is like, is it really, how will people kind of do this sort of thing, or is it just a bit ridiculous, a bit like gimmicky? And also, like, would it be a good thing or a bad thing for the world? Because, like, yeah, will we travel around? Will we travel around less? And would that be better for the planet? But will it be worse for like our relations with each other, our like interactions, knowing different people in different places? Or will it be better because actually there's a lot of kind of, this whole over tourism or exploitation, or people work, I don't know, or like tourists sort of ruining places for people who live there, and so that would be like, so maybe it'd actually be better if people just went to less places, less people went to less places. So yeah, I've kind of blabbed a lot there, so I don't know what your thoughts on all that is.
Well, I'm definitely thinking intensely about it. It's an interesting thing to consider. First of all, I think that it is likely, in my mind, although when you first brought it up, I was like, oh, well, like I say, the trends have been going the other way. People have been moving around more and more. But but then, I mean, you highlight a lot of, I think, really important benefits. And some of those benefits could conceivably not be as relevant in the future, but many other ones, I think, are intrinsic to the costs of basically having people simultaneously occupying two different areas. It just seems to, in terms of like the space where they live, it seems like things like that it's very hard to imagine them not being a net kind of cost in various ways. But the thing that really, I suppose, makes the idea seem likely to me is that no one needs to work on the question of cyber tourism for the next 30 years. Everyone could just not pay attention to doing anything about it, and 30 years later it would be suddenly vastly more easy and cheap to do it in a way that would be vastly more entertaining and engaging, just because all of the skill, all of the kind of technology that's developed in gaming is going in this direction anyway, right? I mean, there's a huge I don't have any VR products or whatever, but I'll eventually get them when they're cheap, and they will eventually get cheap. You know what I mean? There's no doubt that this is, to the degree that people will be able to do this, it's probably going to be exclusionary at some point for various services. But I think over time, you should the trends for this kind of media are that it would become better and cheaper regularly, and then at a certain point, if you're describing a scenario where like you and your mates like, oh, let's go hang out. I mean, the one part that is sort of hard to really imagine is finding human interaction as satisfying in a virtual environment, whether it be with the people you want to travel with or with the people you would like to meet while traveling. But I honestly think that's kind of a lack of imagination. I mean, I feel I lack the imagination here, but I think. But if there's if the tools are good enough, it's just going to have a big enough payoff in terms of people enjoying it.
Yeah, and it might not be the case of like, do we want to experience like tourism in this way? It might be like, that's just what we're going to have to do, and it might be there's things we'll lose from that. But like, say if VR and similar technologies become more embedded in our daily life, like more part of our daily experience, then it won't seem so like outlandish or whatever, or will you know what I mean? To be like, oh, it seems kind of ridiculous now. It's like, oh, I'll take a holiday just like virtually. But maybe in the future, if those things are if that's more prevalent in general in your day-to-day interactions, it would make sense that you kind of be like, oh, this weekend, like instead of flying off to like whatever Mallorca or something for a weekend, you just I don't know. It comes through weird to imagine, but you would just because actually one thing that I forgot to say there earlier is like one of the main things of holidays of like going to a different place is that when you kind of displace yourself geographically, it does make you. It's just like, oh, I don't have to think about my worries in Dublin or wherever you are because you're like, I'm in a different place in a different like setting.
Yeah.
But the thing is, often people go and go to sit on the beach or to like do something that you don't necessarily have to be in New York or whatever it is to actually do that. But still, mentally, there is something about being in the different place. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, the weather would be one big thing, but that could be simulations, easy.
Yeah.
I'm like becoming a travel agent here now for a virtual travel agent. But do you know what I mean? There's this weird thing of like, you don't actually have to go to a different country to like sit back and take it easy and like eat nice food and have a glass of wine and chat to your partner. So you don't actually have to go to a different country and like the CO2 that is involved. But being in that different country just gives you this kind of disconnect from your life. So how would we achieve that? I suppose that's the context of like, oh, we're in this different place, we're away from our normal lives. I think that's the hard part,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that it's hard, but I guess I definitely just refuse to say that it's impossible or something. And so it's like the physicality of being in the place. I mean, you mentioned people going on hikes, for example, and I think it could be occurring to some people that this could have a similar kind of problem that we associate with video game playing today if it's done in excess, which is just like it is a lethargic activity physically, so it's associated with lack of fitness if you're playing crazy amounts of video games. And if you're going on entire holidays, spending all day exploring environments, and you were actually just sitting down while that was happening, then I could see that feeling a bit dystopian. But even there, I mean, you mentioned simulating the weather. It sounds crazy, but I mean, it's just definitely a technologically feasible thing, and it'll while it may be prohibitively expensive with what we can imagine doing it with now, it just won't be indefinitely. And then I feel that, I mean, with regards to movement, which is just something that was on my mind, there are already people with virtual reality setups where you walk around physically in order to walk around in the virtual space. They use little like sort of netted things, and then like you wear socks, and as you push across it, the current is registered, I think, or maybe it's there's a separate controller. Yeah, I guess I just think there are lots of cool little problems there, which for the purpose of very successful mass entertainment will be developed to people play Pokemon Go and run around and like massing up streets. I mean, less so than they used to. It's not very good as a game, but the idea of being able to take their virtual experience of something completely different and then experience it outside physically is really attractive.
Yeah, there definitely would be more like melding of those two things, like the technological with the tourism, like even going to places, like Pokemon Go, basically. Which I actually heard something about, I think it was This American Life episode where they talked about like some town, some kind of like cutesy little historical town in the US that was destroyed by Pokemon Go because somehow there was like loads of Pokemon there. So all these like people just came and were just pissing off the normally the normal kind of tourists who went there were just kind of like rich people who went there to like buy antique furniture or something. And I know, I just thought it was kind of funny. I was like, because there was all these people playing Pokemon Go who like didn't want to buy antique furniture, so they weren't really making any money from them.
Yeah, they weren't optimized for that particular market. I think I thought I heard something similar to that, but it wasn't. It was set in Japan, and it was the same kind of deal that a tourist town had been wrecked by Pokemon Go.
I just had a thought there of like, because Sean is also commenting that it's very hard to get rid of the desire for that escape feeling, to be really separate and away from stuff. So like, how would we that question I was asking of them. So then I was commenting back to him, how do you virtually escape? But then maybe there's going to be like, but that's the thing about talking about the future. There's things that are going to be in the future that we don't even we're not even considering, we can't even imagine right now.
Yeah.
Which is cool. But because, you know, we're still in the brains of the present, or like, and of what has come so far. So there's only so much we can we can really come up with. But then, so maybe there'll be totally different forms of like kind of holidaying, or like having a mental vacation. Like maybe we will literally, I don't know, there's some kind of thing where they'll just extract your brain, or like turn your brain off or something. You know, they take your brain out and they'll just like put it in some kind of little water bowl massagey thing, like when you go to the hairdressers and they're washing your hair and they like massage it a little bit. They massage your head like a little bit, and you're just like, oh, this is lovely. And or you're like, oh, this is awful and so uncomfortable, depending on you. But yeah, maybe we'll have something that weird for our brain, so we won't actually have to physically displace ourselves and go to some other location. There'll just be some sort of weird like brain therapy thing where you'll feel like you've actually left your body, or left your where you are. I know this is sort of a little bit of a sidetrack here, but
no, but
you know, I'm just like, maybe there'll be ways in the future that we'll be able to like feel like we get away from everything physically, like I'll actually physically have a feeling, but we won't have physically left.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, I mean, perhaps what I would find more or easier to imagine, which achieves the same description, I suppose, would be like some kind of, like we were talking about brain-computer interfaces the other week. If you had a brain-computer interface, even of the non-invasive kind, that could theoretically be developed using infrared holography, if that's just one particular company that have made big claims. Then you could directly receive signals of information that you have not in fact received. So you could then be given a fully virtual experience that was absolutely being generated. I mean, assuming we had worked out a huge amount of information about the brain, although it would be a very useful tool for doing so, it would probably remain quite hard. So it's speculative, but nonetheless, it's sort of a kind of concrete image of something that people would be willing to tolerate, and which would totally deliver this experience. And
yes,
would have lots of
and probably a bit more. What would be an alternative, which is probably a bit more doable, is as Dara suggests, sensory isolation tank and ketamine. the holidays of the future.
But yeah, no, I think it would. Those serve as good examples. But I just remain relatively steadfast on the point that the VR experience itself, I mean, it's just very possible to imagine a VR system that essentially functions like a kind of exoskeleton, i.e., and this is like, you know, various versions of this are just really popular ideas that people are working on all the time, which is a big part of why it seems likely. That is monitoring all of your movements, and you're seeing everything that's being sent. You know, your eyes are just viewing exactly what you would see given whatever interaction you were having with whatever environment. You would be able to feel resistances against things you're pushing. You'd hear all sounds. Yes, doing smells, to be honest, actually is a relatively tricky one. But even in terms of tactile things, it's possible to create.
But the food, Patrick, we need food in our VR holidays.
I'm sorry, I just...
Maybe this is really showing me like the area that I need to. Like, it's clearly, I'm going to break open that VR food.
Yes. It's a real tough scientific problem, I think, compared to, like, even the haptic stuff. Even, like, there's haptic gloves where you'll be able to put your hand into this little space, and then you're viewing your hand with the AR, augmented reality information overlaid on, and, like, a little dog will walk around your hand, and you'll feel it exactly as if a little dog was walking around your hand, and you can pick it up and you can feel the pressure of pushing against it because these gloves are able to.
Whoa!
It's really sophisticated stuff. As I understand it, the smell stuff is just the diversity of compounds that humans can smell, just producing physical chemicals that people can smell. It's just a nightmare.
Yeah. But they do that for, like, when they use VR to do kind of in a therapeutic way, say for people who like the military who have like post-traumatic stress disorder, they do, like, say they ask them about a particular experience, they do ask them about, because it's so smell is so powerful for triggering memories, they do ask them like about the smells that were there, and they try to recreate, I mean, yeah, maybe not with technology, but say if it's sort of like dust or burnt tire, and they try to bring those things in to the room. Like, I think, you know, normal VR stuff or for gaming, yeah, doesn't usually do that, but because it's like a context where they're trying to really get them like back into this mindset. So yeah, I think there are people already trying to trying to do those kind of things. But what was I going to say there? But yeah, there is a thing like we sort of briefly touched on it, the idea of the kind of gaming world overlapping with this holiday world. So like that's actually quite we maybe didn't fully explore that how exciting that is, because like the thing is, one other thing I was thinking as well that I forgot to say is that like it opens the possibility of like we don't have to stick to reality. If you're going on a VR tour of somewhere, you can also just like you can touch the place up, or make things reconstruct a few of those like of those damaged buildings damaged in the war or whatever, like but then it's also then will that become not interesting, or like could you choose what level of like are you going to go into, like go and visit medieval Poland, or like like
yeah, I mean,
there's a lot of possibilities there that we didn't discuss, but like
no, but you're absolutely right. I mean that's like I think that's already like as the Assassin's Creed example is already the beginning of the process, and it's exactly that, which is just sort of the whole thing is basically funded by the less touristic, more focused on gaming ends, but then the gamers themselves and then even people who are specialists in the area derive a lot of pleasure and benefit from just the work that was done on recreating an environment. And it's since become a relatively I mean, if you look at GTA 5, it's not just in terms of features of LA, but also the cultural aspects of the place they're depicting is supposed to be immersive in a way that's quite sophisticated and not it's kind of satirical, so it's not fully accurate, but you still see that there's kind of a huge interest in that. And as soon as I'd say the maps that we'll get that will be used in in cyber tourism, which is already the case, I'd say, in a lot of situations, they won't be primarily generated for it. They'll be generated by either Google's monitoring of the world physically / road mapping.
Oh god, but there's also the kind of more well, see, almost dystopian idea of like a world that's now there's like TripAdvisor and all these freaking things you can like review and rate everything, but like if technology is more part of the tourism experience, then like all those everything will be completely determined by review. Maybe it already is, but like it's just this awful crowdsourced, like I don't know, tearing some businesses down and and I don't know.
The effect on businesses, like there's definitely a huge sort of network of businesses that would be disturbed immensely by this shift. But
sorry, a few good comments here. This is something that we didn't talk about, but I was thinking about it earlier and then didn't mention. Is the Jen is saying that VR isn't a shared experience; it's solo. So part of the joy of travel is experiencing with other people and like sharing it with them, seeing their reaction. So that was one thing I was thinking of. Like, is there a way that you can have how could you be in something with? I feel like that's quite another step or leap for like VR. That's how do you experience with other people?
Feasible. I think it's definitely less outlandish than some of the VR enhancements I have pontificated on. The idea, I mean, like having a shared VR experience is definitely possible. I suppose in terms of actually seeing their reactions, which is mentioned there, it's a thing we haven't seen yet with VR avatar. Because VR is usually you be represented as an avatar, and so you're not really seeing their reaction. Although you'll see some semblance of it, and then it's just a question of how sophisticated the semblance is and what your lag time is, and which are, and all these I kind of view as solvable.
Yeah, and maybe you wouldn't be, or maybe you would be some kind of ghost, but like this thing of could you actually have some sort of presence that could interact with people on location? That would be quite cool. I think, like that you're some sort of I don't know how it would really even work, but that you're some hologram floating around in Venice or whatever, or Baghdad or whatever, wherever you are. Because it'd be cool to be able to interact with people as a ghost.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, that would be cool. Although it's a trickier one.
It's a bit far-fetched.
To
yeah. Matthew also made a good point there.
Yeah.
That yes, is it not more? This is when we were talking about. Well, I don't know. It was a little while ago. More likely that Paddy, aka you, would murder his way through Renaissance Venice. This will only be. That it will be palatable to the consumer once you've thoroughly junked each pleasant environment. So yeah, but it's better to like virtually destroy places than
Yeah, yeah.
not virtually.
I just haven't
If
seen the word used junked used that way before.
What?
The word junked as a verb. I just haven't.
Is that what he means though, right? Like
until we've thoroughly junked each pleasant environment. Anyway, sorry, this is definitely like, I'm getting into the most boring potential.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I've taken that the wrong way. I don't know. I think our commenters make more intelligent sentences than us. So, yeah.
Grant. Well,
okay.
That was.
So, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Well, I guess we should probably name the episode, right? So, I was thinking, the point.
And then you think we should name it during the episode?
Yeah, why not? Like, so the point of no return ticket was the first one that came to mind. It sort of does describe it, but it's a bit dad-ish. So then, if you say like the come on, we got the point of no return. We got like.
Well, I feel like it's return and
the flight.
You know, there's the potential there to combine these two concepts into something quite clever and punish.
Well,
but I don't know.
I said point of no return ticket. Because the ticket referring to traveling, you know? Is that just not clear? I guess it's not clear.
Yeah, I think there's a better one that I don't know what it is.
Alright, guys. Well, let's hope that I come up with it. Grant, well, I shall...
Yeah, no, sorry. I just always like... that's just my... I just like to hit down to knock Patrick's ideas and not come up with any of my own. That's generally how this working relationship works.
All right. Well,
so and then we go with Patrick's idea, and then I say yes, it's fine. Yes, I'm getting quiet. You need to open I have to keep the window open because it's quite like I'm doing this because it can be quite a lot of sound in my street.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm very, very warm in here. So
sorry. Just to be clear, Matthew has clarified what he was saying, which is that he was referring to alternative environments, virtual environments, only being popular as a function of the destruction of the real ones, which is a depressing concept, and I hope he's wrong.
Yes, well, that is a good point that we can sort of like, you know, that we've sadly through climate change destroyed medieval Poland, but now we could revisit it through this sort of weird nostalgia. Like we could go, that means you could have a kind of Jurassic Park type.
I'm sure that would.
I'm sure this already exists.
That'd be early enough for the agenda. Grant. Well, I will chat to you next week. I think we're coming up over an hour now.
Yes. So let's let the people rest their weary brains, as I am about to do. Okay, well, have a good week, and
travel in the future. It's a pleasure hearing about future travel thoughts.
Yes, and being mind boggled by future humans and vacuum things. So yeah, it's nice to get if anyone has more suggestions, good to get them.
I will be critical of them, but at the same time, very grateful. All right, bye-bye.
So that's what it's all about, being critical of everything. Okay. Okay. Thanks everybody for the comments. See you next time. Bye.